conquering the rushing power of water, releasing the energy in coal to make steam to generate electricity, tapping deep reservoirs of oil to help meet the nation's power needs, harnessing natural gas for industry and the home, and finally, unlocking the power of the atom. Putting the peaceful atom to work to generate electricity promises almost unlimited energy resources for today and tomorrow to meet the surging demands for safe, economical, smoke-free power. This is a spent fuel element from the reactor of an atomic power plant. Now, after 1 year in the power reactor, it is exhausted and must be removed. Not to be discarded like the ashes from a coal fire, but to have the valuable materials still inside reclaimed for future use. From atomic power plants throughout the United States and from research and test reactors, spent nuclear fuel elements in ruggedly built trucks and special railroad cars head toward western New York State and the first privately owned plant in the world, built exclusively to recover nuclear fuel for future use. The plant of Nuclear Fuel Services, site leased from the New York State Atomic and Space Development Authority, located 30 miles south of Buffalo in West Valley, New York. Here begins the story of nuclear fuel reprocessing. Reprocessing nuclear fuel is a story of mechanical and chemical ingenuity that is contributing to the rapid growth of low-cost atomic-generated electric power and promises even more benefits as new uses are found for the byproducts of this plant. Each day, Nuclear Fuel Services can process up to 1 ton of spent fuel elements, reclaiming the highly valuable uranium and plutonium still locked within them. Upon arrival, the shipping container is checked carefully in the receiving area, the superstructure removed, and the rugged cask which contains the spent fuel elements is lowered into a 45-foot deep pool of water where the top is removed from the cask by remote-controlled wrenches. This cask contains 10 spent fuel elements. One by one, they are lifted out and each placed in its individual canister, always with 11 or more feet of water between the fuel element and the surface. Traveling cranes carry each canister still underwater to the fuel storage pool, where hundreds of fuel elements, each in its separate canister, are stored to await the beginning of the processing cycle. To convey a single canister to the process mechanical room, 2 claws on a mechanical arm take a canister from the fuel storage pool and transfer it underwater until it emerges through a trapdoor and the single fuel element is removed from the canister by means of remote-controlled manipulators whose operators work behind 4 feet of concrete. Mechanical processing starts here. The spent uranium dioxide fuel is located inside the long tubes that are bundled together to make up the fuel element. The tubes are of high-strength metals, such as zirconium or stainless steel alloys, which are durable at high temperatures and extremely hard. The problem is to open these tubes so that later in the process, chemicals can go to work and separate the uranium, plutonium, and fission products from the metal of the tubes. The best way to do this is by sawing off the metal ends of the fuel elements with an abrasive saw. The fuel element, now minus its end fittings, is a bundle of tubes that is charged into this magazine. Positioning the rods and holding them securely while they are fed into a powerful mechanical shear that chops the tubes into short lengths so that the nitric acid used later in the process will be able to attack the spent fuel and dissolve it from the metal tubes. The guillotine pieces then fall into a chute leading to the general purpose cell. To receive the chopped pieces of metal, a cylindrical stainless steel basket perforated with small holes and containing a thin iron liner is placed in a transfer device that moves the basket into position under the chute, ready to receive the chopped metal scraps and used fuel. The iron liner holds the metal pieces and prevents the valuable powdered fuel from passing through the holes of the basket. When the basket is loaded with chopped fuel pieces, it can be either stored in this cell or lifted into the chemical processing cell, where large tanks filled with nitric acid receive the baskets. The acid begins to chew away at the thin iron liner, quickly dissolving it, then attacking and separating the spent fuel from the chopped pieces of metal tubes. When the separation is complete, the nitric acid now contains dissolved uranium, plutonium, and fission products, and is pumped out of the dissolver tanks. The stainless steel basket, which now contains only the pieces of chopped metal tubes that were not dissolved by the nitric acid, is removed from the dissolver tank and lowered to the general purpose cell for sampling to determine if all the uranium and plutonium has been removed from the chopped tubes. Representative samples are taken to a laboratory and analyzed. The remaining chopped pieces. Quality control is an underlying theme at Nuclear Fuel Services. The entire process is analyzed and monitored to guarantee that the efficiency of the system is up to required levels. For example, the dissolver solution from each dissolver batch is sampled and analyzed to establish precisely the amount and value of uranium and plutonium contained in the fuel. In this and other stages of the process, Nuclear Fuel Services chemists determine such important factors as isotopic concentration, acidity, amount of impurities, and specific gravity. The entire reprocessing operation of Nuclear Fuel Services is under centralized control from this master control room, where every part of the operation is observed and coordinated around the clock. Operators watch the process with a help plan that pinpoints every step in the cycle. Shown here schematically from arrival and storage of the spent fuel elements, sawing and chopping of the fuel elements, dissolving in nitric acid, burial of the chopped metal pieces, separation and purification of the uranium and plutonium, and shipping. The next step in separating the uranium, plutonium, and fission products is to remove the major portion of the fission products, the ashes and clinkers of atomic fire, from the solution that has come from the dissolver tanks. This is done by means of a selective extraction process. The scrub liquid literally blots up the fission products and removes them through the bottom of the tank. The fission products are concentrated and then buried in large and deep underground waste storage tanks under state and federal regulations. The remaining solution, containing the valuable uranium and plutonium, both with lingering traces of fission products, is pumped to another operation where a process called selective reduction takes place. The uranium and plutonium are separated into two streams, and both streams then undergo further treatment to remove the last traces of fission products. To rid the plutonium of any lingering traces of fission products, it is passed through an ion exchange bed, which literally holds the plutonium in the bed and allows the remaining fission products to pass through. Regeneration of the ion exchange bed recovers the purified plutonium. Uranium also undergoes a further purification step by passing it through silica gel, which adsorbs any last trace of the unwanted fission product. The concentrated uranium nitrate solution stored in this tank prior to shipping is the primary product of Nuclear Fuel Services. Plutonium is shipped by pumping it into plastic cylinders, then placing them in large steel drums for shipment. From the storage tank, the solution of uranium nitrate is pumped into a tank truck. Then the valuable cargo goes to a distant location to be converted and fabricated into new fuel elements for an atomic power plant, such as Consolidated Edison's Indian Point Atomic Power Plant, near Peekskill, New York, on the shores of the Hudson River, which supplies nuclear-generated power to the New York metropolitan area. This plant, like many others, has already proved itself as a safe, practical source of energy for economical generation of electric power. In the years to come, atomic energy will produce an ever-increasing amount of electric power, and the commercial fuel reprocessing plant of Nuclear Fuel Services, with its innovative technology, will help make atomic power plants a prime source of economical electric power that offers control of the peaceful atom will continue to expand in the field of power generation, furnishing economical and smoke-free electric power to factories, homes, farms, and the large metropolitan areas of America. Civilian nuclear power is here to stay, and the atom is the symbol of this new generation of energy that is being used at an accelerating pace for the betterment of mankind.
Everybody, I'm John Beard in West Valley, where news was made again today because the Department of Energy recommended that the old NFS plant here be used for the storage of more spent nuclear fuel. West Valley is just a small village in Cattaraugus County, farm country for the most part. In 1966, National Fuel Services built this plant to receive and store spent nuclear fuel from reactors. In 1972, the plant went out of business, and the radioactive material lies buried beneath the soil. Environmentalists say West Valley is a time bomb threatening to leak deadly radioactive liquid into the soil and eventually into the waterways of western New York. But most local residents don't see it that way.
We need it for tax purposes, for people to work in. We have a lot of people that are working there now. I hate to see them unemployed.
It's never bothered me. I'm not against it.
Do you think there is any danger there?
With the storing of the spent rods, no. I don't think so.
They should have thought of that 20 years ago and set it out. It's there, and I think they should put it into operation and do what they want with it.
The people who staffed the old NFS plant and many of the people who live in this area feel it was safe when it was built and that it's safe now. The Sierra Club has a different point of view. Dr. Marvin Resnikoff is a spokesman for the Sierra Club and also a nuclear physicist. He told News 4's Alan Costantini today he doesn't think the NFS plant will ever be reopened.
We're outraged by the suggestion. I think there will be a lot of people in West New York who will be outraged by the suggestion, and I think there'll be a lot of pressure by the public not to put a facility here in West New York.
Do you think it'll happen?
Well, not if citizens, of course, oppose it. I think there'll be strong opposition, and I think there'll be pressure on the county legislature to pass a ban against spent fuel moving through the county, and I think there'll be pressure on the state legislature to pass a bill by Assemblyman Walsh and Senator Volker that would ban a repository.
This area is represented in Congress by Democrat Stanley Lundeen. We contacted him today in Washington.
This report is a little disturbing to the extent that it doesn't rank West Valley clearly third among the priorities, which I think objectively it should be, both on the basis of storage capacity and seismic or environmental problems. But I don't think the report is a big problem, and I'm not discouraged. I think it's still a remote possibility that West Valley will be used for storage of additional spent fuel rods as an away-from-reactor federal storage facility.
As Congressman Lundeen points out, the NFS plan is considered the lowest priority side of the three listed, and the controversy has the federal government squaring off against state, county, and local representatives. So nothing is expected to be resolved for a year at the earliest. By the way, that is Nuclear Fuel Services and not National Fuel Services. Safety questions of nuclear waste storage at West Valley are being raised again by area environmentalist. Rich Newberg reports on a new wave of reaction to new chances of reopening storage facilities at Nuclear Fuel Services.
Storage of these spent fuel rods containing uranium and plutonium is a critical process and a potentially dangerous one. If the water, acting as a cooling agent, were to leak out, the possibility of a meltdown would be heightened. Some environmentalists say this could also occur if the metal canisters protecting the rods were somehow ruptured.
The man who owns this sticker is a former lab supervisor at NFS. He says he doesn't want to see any more spent nuclear fuel rods brought into West Valley because of problems he says he became aware of while working at the facility.
They had trouble periodically with the crane that moves the fuel in the pool itself. They have trouble stopping the thing. You know, they would get it going too fast and have a bunch of fuel hanging from the crane hook and slam it into other fuel, you know, and the stuff would about fall over. And they had some real problems that way, and they scared themselves quite often that they were going to cause a criticality. I think this might happen if they get too much fuel jammed into that pool.
A Nuclear Fuel Services spokesman told me today he knows of no crane problems occurring while the plant was in operation. Environmentalists are also pointing to this study by the Livermore Labs in California. The study, commissioned in part by the Federal Department of Energy, found a portion of the containing wall of the pool susceptible to cracking and leaking if there were a seismic disturbance in the area. This type of disturbance could happen at West Valley. Nuclear Fuel Services says this is not a major structural defect, but at least some environmentalists disagree.
I think the problems outlined in the Livermore study, even with a small amount of fuel that's there already, make it absurd to talk about bringing in more fuel.
Environmentalists say they will continue to press their fight against reopening West Valley for nuclear waste storage, despite safety reassurances from the Department of Energy and Nuclear Fuel Services. Rich Newberg, News 4, Buffalo.
I'm in Delavan, 9 miles east of West Valley, and I'm holding a petition that's been sitting in this store and other stores in the area for about 3 weeks now. The petition calls for a ban on any further transportation of nuclear waste to West Valley and to remove all present nuclear waste stored at the site.
The man who has been a major force in the new wave of protest is dairy farmer Emil Zimmerman. Son of a German immigrant, Zimmerman started his farm 34 years ago with $100 in his pocket and a horse on his property. He now owns 70 cows and 175 acres of land. Mr. Zimmerman lives about a half a mile from the nuclear storage site and believes if nothing is done now by area residents, the facility will soon become a repository for not only this country's nuclear waste, but that of Europe's as well.
I think the immediate goal is to make sure that the federal government does not take this over as a federal waste site. Buffalo being a nuclear port, and of course it's very accessible to the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence Seaway, I'm sure we're going to see a lot of nuclear waste coming in from Europe. And the only place to put them is West Valley if they come in the Great Lakes, because the dump is there.
So while Zimmerman held 1,000 signatures in his hand on his hill overlooking nuclear fuel services, petitions in 3 neighboring counties were being signed by people who seem to see the problem the same way he does.
We've had too much chemical problems, and this is just another form of it, I think. So I'm going to sign it.
One petitioner who lost some farmland to NFS after a court battle many years ago wondered out loud today if several thousand names on petitions would really make a difference. Then another petitioner added, this is the first time in many years people of West Valley and the surrounding area are taking a firm stand, one way or the other. Rich Newberg, News 4, West Valley. What you're seeing right now are about a half a dozen deer heading toward the low-level nuclear burial site. Deer that perhaps could someday be hunted by man and eaten. Though the deer are eating grass 20 feet above radioactive waste, state environmental conservation officials say their tests of deer, both inside and outside the 50-acre fenced-in area, show the animals safe for human consumption.
Levels that we have gotten in the deer that we have analyzed show that that meat is comparable to any meat that is found in any other area of the state.
Back in the early 70s, when Nuclear Fuel Services was still reprocessing fuel, state officials became concerned when high levels of radioactive strontium-90 and cesium-137 were found in deer and fish. But even these levels, they said, did not pose an imminent danger to humans. The problem was corrected. But since the plant closing, there have been leaks in the outdoor low-level burial ground area, where we spotted the deer grazing yesterday.
The site is contaminated with radioactive materials. That burial ground where the deer were observed has a lot of radioactivity within it, and it has leaked in the past. So the land is contaminated around there, and we assume that any animals that graze on that land will also eat contaminated grass.
I learned today some highly radioactive water will be pumped out of the burial site sometime this summer. The water will go into a pond where it will sit for 3 or 4 weeks before it is treated. The pond will be accessible to animals, I'm told, but at this time there are no plans to put a fence around the area. Rich Newberg, News 4, Buffalo.
Against them bringing nuclear waste into West Valley. I'm hoping they'll clean it up because it's dangerous.
It's going to cause a lot of medical problems with our people and people to come. You know, people are afraid to come in the area.
I'm concerned about having that thing close by.
The meeting was called to give some background on the now closed nuclear fuel reprocessing plant and to map out a strategy to fight the reopening of the nuclear waste storage area in West Valley. 82 communities in 10 states have banned the transportation of nuclear waste within their borders. But some local villages in western New York have held off on such a vote until they find out how the people of West Valley themselves feel about the issue.
I don't see it as a valid argument for anyone to say, well, enough people in West Valley aren't against it. It's going to affect everyone in this area, you know, especially if there's an accident in transportation or if there's a major accident at that plant. Then, because you're a resident of West Valley or Ellicottville isn't going to save you.
Those who favor reopening nuclear fuel services recall the number of jobs created when the reprocessing facility was in operation from 1966 to 1972, including unloading the spent fuel rods and setting them in their final storage space. But 8 years after the closing of the facility, some believe the environmental risks now outweigh the economic gains from such an operation and vow to take every legal measure to prevent the reopening of the storage site.
It's very reasonable for the city of Buffalo in particular, and probably the state of New York, to reopen the waste low-level burial sites at West Valley.
If there is one segment of the population that could force the reopening of West Valley's nuclear burial grounds, it's the people who support nuclear medicine and research. Through the use of radioactive isotopes injected into patients, doctors have been able to find tumors and diagnose various disorders of heart and brain that can't be done with other techniques. In research, radioactive tracers have been powerful tools in fundamental studies of the nature of cancer. Almost every hospital in Buffalo has a department of nuclear medicine and a related complex of nuclear research labs, all producing radioactive waste, waste that is becoming more difficult to dispose of. Radioactive material with half-lives ranging from 6 hours to 5,000 years, the time it takes for the material to become neutral. Metal and plastic drums containing experimental animal carcasses, vials of radioactive blood testing material, contaminated gloves, paper, and plastic pipes, all picked up each week at Buffalo area hospitals for truck shipment to South Carolina and the state of Washington, the only 2 states in the nation that will accept the low-level radioactive waste. And these states are having second thoughts.
The problem is not that there's a lot of radioactivity, but there's a lot of feeling by the people in South Carolina and in Washington that they should not take waste from the whole country, and I can certainly sympathize with that point of view.
The amount of radioactive waste produced by nuclear medicine is minuscule compared to nuclear power plants, but doctors and scientists say that won't make any difference if alternate burial grounds are not found. The threat, they say, is no less than a total shutdown of nuclear medicine and research in the U.S.
From Western New York's first news station, here is News 4 Update.
Good evening, I'm Rich Newberg. Words of caution tonight from the Coalition on West Valley Nuclear Waste. On Friday, Governor Carey struck an agreement with the federal government, with the Department of Energy saying it would manage and pay for cleanup efforts at the nuclear dump site in West Valley. But that agreement still depends on Congress passing what is known as the Moynihan-Javits Bill, a bill that David Piles, the coalition, says will lead to the reopening of West Valley as a nuclear storage site.
They say it's contingent on the Moynihan-Javits bill being passed. The Moynihan-Javits bill has an amendment in it that gives the Secretary of Energy the authority to do anything he feels is in the national interest regarding nuclear waste management at the West Valley site. So essentially we think this deal is a buildup rather than a cleanup of the whole site.
When you talk of buildup, what kind of material are you talking about?
We're talking about a buildup by possibly an away-from-reactor storage site for spent fuel rods, where they bring in these highly radioactive fuel rods containing, fission products, plutonium, what have you, from power reactors to store them at West Valley. Talking about even possibly reprocessing spent fuel there again, which is what the plant was originally built for.
Local environmental groups are clashing head-on with new state rules proposed for burial of radioactive waste. Rich Newberg is here tonight with more on that story. Rich?
Thanks, John. Well, the issue is whether those wastes should be buried at all. Some environmentalists have pointed to problems already encountered at West Valley and fear the state rules are laying the groundwork for a reopening of that site. Here are the arguments the Sierra Club uses in its fight to keep West Valley closed. Item: plutonium, banned from burial in 1977, was found to be contained in the low-level radioactive burial ground at West Valley. A lack of foresight, say environmentalists, since it can't be monitored. The plutonium is still in the ground.
We want the hazardous material dug up and put in above-ground bins where they can be adequately monitored and maintained for the number of decades that are necessary.
Item: leaks in the burial ground in 1975 and continued problems with water infiltrating the ditches where radioactive substances are stored.
Well, there are materials in the West Valley burial ground that are very toxic. The burial ground has leaked in the past and is filling with water and will probably leak again, requires continual maintenance. We believe that some of those materials, such as plutonium and strontium-90, should be unearthed and put in bins above ground.
Item: layers of sand discovered in what was thought to be solid clay. Radioactive tritium was found to have migrated 6 feet from the sides of the trenches in 1977. It was later learned only 3 to 5 borings on the 7-acre storage site were made to test the soil composition. At a public hearing in Buffalo today, state environmental officials listened to protests of future burial of radioactive waste, and the state presented its case for what it calls a secure landfill. This is all happening at a time when the radioactive waste from area hospitals is becoming increasingly difficult to dispose of. The nuclear medical community is hoping the state will reopen West Valley for its convenience. So there are many forces pulling in many different directions, but both the Sierra Club and Coalition on Nuclear Waste at West Valley want to see a solution to that medical waste problem, but they feel this too could be solved with above-ground storage areas. Meanwhile, everybody seems to want that plutonium lifted out of the ground at West Valley. John, at least the environmental groups do.
Okay, thanks a lot, Rich. A new report calling for the reopening of the West Valley plant for nuclear waste has been called outrageous by Congressman Stanley Lundeen. Rich Newberg is with us tonight with the latest out of Washington.
Well, John, you recall last week Governor Carey reached agreement with the Federal Energy Office about the immediate future of West Valley. Well, let's first look at that agreement and then compare it to today's proposal by the General Accounting Office. The governor's agreement was that the federal government would cover most of the cost of cleaning up the high-level liquid radioactive waste stored underground in a container that's believed to be deteriorating. This was to be the first major solidification project in the country, perhaps costing up to $1 billion, but affecting other such sites where similar waste must be removed. Above all, the agreement said the federal government would not allow any more dumping of radioactive waste at West Valley, at least until the liquid is cleaned up. But now, the General Accounting Office in Washington is proposing full federal funding of the cleanup in exchange for a reopening of the site for high and low-level nuclear waste. The GAO further states the project is of limited demonstration value to the country. Needless to say, the report drew quick reaction today from the local Sierra Club.
Supposedly, the Carey-Sawhill agreement was supposed to reassure us that West Valley would not be used for dumping until the present mess was cleaned up. And now they're telling us that we should accept more waste while we're cleaning up the wastes that are currently there. And it's kind of like sweeping up a pile of dirt and then turning around and dumping another one on the floor.
So how much weight does this GAO report really carry? Well, not much. According to the governor's office, 1 out of 3 Washington committees dealing with West Valley has recommended the report. Not enough to make a difference, according to the governor's spokesman. But it was enough to raise some new questions about how some agencies in Washington view the problem in West Valley. John?
Okay, thanks a lot, Rich.
With Assembly Majority Leader Dan Walsh and State Senator Dale Volker by his side, Governor Carey signed the Walsh-Volker bill setting up a 5-member siting board for future burial of radioactive waste. The governor then assured environmentalists there would be no federal dumping of high-level radioactive waste at West Valley, at least until the site is cleaned up.
They have agreed to come on the site and undertake the responsibility and the work of crystallizing, of solidifying the current liquid waste that's in the carbon steel tank that's there now. That's the total limit of the federal commitment at this time. Downrange in the future, let's see what this process develops. There's no concept here that this is going to be used for defense purposes or additional nuclear fuel storage.
But then the bombshell. The governor strongly hinted the low-level nuclear burial grounds might soon be reopened for radioactive waste from area hospitals.
We can't expect other states to take our waste, so we must provide low-level waste burial facilities. There is such a facility at West Valley. We will continue to operate that. Otherwise, you have the waste in Buffalo.
The governor's comments did not go over well with environmentalists.
I think he's launching a new campaign to open up that burial ground, and that's something that will never be acceptable to the people of the area because it's simply unsafe. There are better things to do with medical wastes than to bury them in the ground in a leaky trench.
Governor Carey spent the day in Washington trying to get federal funding for a cleanup of West Valley. The bill's sponsor is Representative Stanley Lundeen of Jamestown.
The West Valley demonstration project would solidify 600,000 gallons of high-level liquid nuclear waste now being held in a large storage tank. Some Energy and Power Subcommittee members appeared concerned that New York State and the West Valley project will be getting a lot and the federal government nothing if the bill is passed without some provision for future, long-term, away-from-the-reactor nuclear waste storage at the site. A recent Government Accounting Office report suggests such an amendment be written into the West Valley bill, a point the bill's author and New York Governor Carey fought against.
We're asking for a solidification project to be undertaken here. It happens to be at West Valley because that's where the waste is. That does not automatically say that because somebody 10 years, 1970, decided to choose this site for commercial ventures for waste treatment. This makes it an ideal
AFR site by today's standards.
Both Lundin and Carey say they are not precluding use of West Valley for future storage, but they think that issue should be decided on its own merits separate from the solidification project. The West Valley demonstration project has already passed the Senate and 2 congressional subcommittees, but any attempt to amend it in these busy days before an election year could possibly kill the project this session. Bob Petrick, News 4, Washington.
The Senate has approved a bill to let Uncle Sam buy a nuclear storage dump, and West Valley is one of 3 choices. Tonight, Rich Newberg was in Little Valley as residents had their first chance to plead against turning their backyards into a nuclear graveyard.
Up until now, the Cattaraugus County Board has not taken a stand on the West Valley issue. Not enough information, they said. Well, after tonight's meeting, they may not be able to plead ignorance. A majority of legislators came to hear the pros and cons of reopening West Valley for nuclear waste. It was a meeting local citizens opposed to future burial had been requesting for a year. Citizens like 50-year resident Emil Zimmerman, whose dairy farm is located a mile downwind from the Nuclear Fuel Services plant. He said there are known sand and gravel layers that have created radioactive leaks in the burial ground.
Without determining the location of these subsurface veins of sand and gravel, which can carry water, one would be a fool to guarantee that hazardous waste materials could not escape. Indeed, one such vein was discovered penetrating trench number 12. It was 65 feet long and about 2 feet thick.
Kenneth Dufresne represented the other side of the argument. He was a former worker at Nuclear Fuel Services and now represents Chem Nuclear Systems, a company that would like to bury solid, low-level nuclear waste at West Valley.
The leaks at the site have been very minor. If you look at, if someone takes the time to see what these leaks really were, you find out that they were monitored. They know how much radiation leaked off. They did not cause any kind of a problem to anyone at any time.
It is questionable whether the Cattaraugus County Board would have any say either way if the state and federal governments eventually operate the West Valley site. But 12,000 petitions have been signed by citizens against future burial at the site, petitions that call for some kind of stand by the county board. Rich Newberg, News 4 Update. August 6th, 1945. The United States dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, killing at least 71,000 people, wounding 65,000. 3 days later, a second nuclear attack was launched over the city of Nagasaki. 39,000 killed, 25,000 severely wounded. The attack brought the war to an end, but memories of the Holocaust and the trail of cancer and birth defects in its wake still leaves the nation of Japan scarred. Mikio Haruna was born 1 year after the nuclear holocaust. Haruna is a news correspondent for Japan's Kyoto Wire Service and knows that here in western New York, in the town of Lewiston, memories of the atomic bomb are also very much alive.
For inside this tower and a building about a mile away sits radioactive uranium residue left over from the Manhattan Project, the project that led to the creation of the atomic bomb. And in an ironic twist, Mikio has learned the people of Lewiston must now cope with radioactive leaks from the storage area.
I think the people living near this site and the Hiroshima and Nagasaki people have a kind of mutual concern about nuclear radioactive problems.
For his story, Haruna paid a visit to Lewiston Town Hall to speak with a man who has dealt with known radium and radon gas leaks from the storage site. Town Highway and Water Superintendent Calvin Schultz says the people of his town have had to pay a price for these leaks.
It's my understanding that from the people in the Cancer Coalition that we are rate either number 1 or number 2 in the nation for the incidence of cancer in this Niagara County area.
The Japanese will remember their war dead from the atomic blasts in special ceremonies conducted every year on August 6th and August 9th. In western New York, the people of Lewiston have begun asking the United States government for health tests and studies to confirm a suspicion that they too are paying a deathly toll from the Manhattan Project. Rich Newberg, News 4, Town of Lewiston.